look at the Gospel of John. John being not part of the synoptic Gospels, as we looked at the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it's not because John has a lot of different things, different angle that he brings in understanding Jesus in the Gospel itself. I've been thinking a lot lately about, if somebody asks the question, they say, well, who or what is God? God, first and foremost, is an eternal relationship between the Father, Son, and Spirit. And I think the Gospel of John, more than any, really lifts that relationship between the Father and the Son like no other. And then you ask the question, well, what is God like then? If that's who God is, what is God like? God is like Jesus. He said, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. You've seen exactly what God is like. So if you ever wonder, or somebody asks you that question, well, what is God really like? Look at Jesus. Look into the face of Jesus, and you see what God is like. John wrote this letter, this gospel, in about 95 AD. All of his writings, his 3 epistles and the book of Revelation and the gospel, were written later in his life. He had seen in his long life in ministry that people were starting to distort the gospel, distort who Jesus really was. So he took to write his own eyewitness account of who Jesus was. John, in his gospel, never refers to himself by his name. He refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. I think that's interesting. Did the other apostles, did Jesus not love them the same? I mean, they could have all said, I'm the disciple whom he loves. It wasn't out of arrogance. It was out of his identity. It was out of his experience with Jesus. He was truly transformed by Jesus. He, as a younger man and a younger follower of Jesus, he had some arrogance. He was kind of grouchy. And he was transformed into being the apostle of love. When you look back through some of the other Gospels, Mark chapter 10, John asks Jesus for a place of status at his right hand. John selfishly tried to stop others in Luke chapter 9 from preaching about Jesus. And then John reactively, with his brother James, wanted to kill people, literally call fire down from heaven on people who refused to show hospitality to Jesus. And Jesus, rebuked him and walked with him, was patient with him, and transformed him. So you can see that his relationship with following Jesus, who's revealing the heart and the heart of a loving Father to the world, transformed him into being the apostle of love. The main theme in the Gospel of John is John presents Jesus as the Son of God, the divine Son of the living God. And the main verse to remember is John 20, verse 31. He says, "But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life by the power of his name." He's telling whoever is going to read this, I write this to you so that you may continue to be encouraged in your faith. So there's not necessarily a specific audience that John wrote to. He had the whole world in mind, just like Jesus said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." This was to the whole world so that everyone could understand and know who Jesus is. Now, he wrote the gospel, again, to give an accurate picture of what God was like. That was so important to John, to let his audience understand and how Jesus interacted with people, how he confronted the powers of darkness and cast out devils and demons and so forth, and how he confronted the religious framework of the religious leaders of the time, and how sinners and broken people flocked to Jesus to give an accurate picture of the love of God. So if we have a quick outline of the Gospel of John, in there being 21 chapters, first we have the prologue, and that's chapter 1, 1 through 18, where he sets the stage. It's kind of like, when you watch a Star Wars movie and they have the beginning words that are setting the stage for what you're about to watch. John does that brilliantly in the first 18 verses. Then we see Jesus' public ministry from chapter 1, verse 19 through chapter 12, verses 30. He's out doing ministry. And then, interestingly, in his private ministry, chapter 13 through 17, it's a long discourse on what happened on the night before he was going to be betrayed, when he was with his disciples. So the other Gospels are pretty quick to get right to the breaking of the bread and the communion and all of that happened. But John tells this, what Jesus told them in private. And then chapter 18 through 20 is Jesus' passion, that he was betrayed, went before, the religious leaders and Pilate and so on and so forth, ultimately to be crucified and then to be resurrected in chapter 20. Then we'll call it the postscript, is chapter 21. That's where he restores the apostle Peter. And Peter had denied him, 3 times, and 3 times Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me?" And he says, "Feed my sheep, feed my lambs." I think the theme, how John saw Jesus in the gospel, and an understanding of what God is like, is we see that God is light. That's chapter 1 through 12. And then we see that God is love, chapter 13 through 17, and then that God is life, chapter 18 through 21. There's a couple really cool things to look for as you read the Gospel of John. The number 7 is very important. The number 7 in the Bible is the number of perfection, or the number of completion. And there's a bunch of different things that you can look for in the sequence of 7 in there. A couple of them I'll share with you. There's the 7 I am sayings of Jesus in John. The I am was so important to understanding who God is. If you go back to Exodus, when God reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush, he tells him that I'm calling you to be the deliverer of Israel out of bondage of Egypt. And Moses says, well, who should I say is sending me? There's all kinds of gods in this world. Who's sending me? And he says, tell the people that I am is sending you. Yahweh, the true and living God. And Jesus takes that and he talks about, calls himself the I am. He identifies to the religious leaders. He says, before Abraham was, I am. He was equating himself there. It's powerful. So every time he says, I am, his I am always answers our I am nots. Like, we've been whispered in our ear all our lives that you're not capable. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. So on and so forth. We get these subtle messages where Jesus' I amness answers those I am nots. Look for that as you read through the Gospel of John. The 7 I am statements are, he's the bread of life, chapter 6, verse 35. He's the light of the world, chapter 8, verse 12. He says, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in the darkness. Powerful. He says, I'm the gate. I'm the way in, chapter 10, verse 7 and 9. I'm the good shepherd, he says. I'm the good shepherd. Chapter 10, 11, and 14. I'm the resurrection and the life. Chapter 11, verse 25. He said that statement right before he was going to raise his friend Lazarus from the dead. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though they die, they'll live. Then he tells his disciples, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Chapter 14, verse 6. And then lastly, he says, I'm the true vine. When he's in that intimate moment with his disciples, and he says, man, I'm the vine, you're the branch. Stay connected to me. Draw life from me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. But when we're connected to the vine, we're fruitful. Then another 7 sequence that happens in the Gospel of John is the 7 signs or the 7 miracles that Jesus does. His first miracle was at a wedding in Cana, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, where they run out of wine, and Jesus turns water into wine. In chapter 4, he heals the noblewoman's son. Chapter 3, he heals the man at the pool of Bethesda, chapter 5. And then in chapter 6, he feeds the 5,000 people. These are the signs and miracles that he did. He walked on water in chapter 6. No one's ever done that before, except for Peter gets a little glimpse of it for a bit. And then he heals the man who's born blind. That's where we get the famous saying, all I know is I was blind, but now I see. That comes from the song Amazing Grace, comes right out of this blind man who was healed. And then he raises Lazarus in chapter 11. There's many other 7 things to look for. The 7 witnesses that Jesus is the Son of God, 7 word pictures of faith, and then 7 things that happen where Jesus talks about being equal with God the Father. So as you read John, look for understanding Jesus as the true Son of God. Look for him revealing the heart of God the Father for you. John 14:20, Jesus is telling his disciples, he says, on that day, he's referring to the day of Pentecost. He says, on that day, when the Spirit's poured out upon you, you will know that I'm in the Father and that you are in me and I'm in you. We are brought into the very relationship, that eternal relationship between the Father and Son. How perfect is that relationship, right? It's perfect, others-centered love. You and I have been brought by faith into that very relationship. We don't just have a relationship like it. We're in his relationship with his Father. That's so amazing. That's why the book of Hebrews says Jesus is not ashamed to call us his brothers and sisters. So God bless you as you journey through the Gospel of John. I know he has much for you.